And what is going on, everybody? Welcome back to another episode of the Designated Players and MLS podcast. We are here with Tim from Club and Country to chat about Nashville SC in the 2024 season. Tim, how are you?
I'm doing very well. How you guys doing?
Awesome. We're doing well. Thanks so much for being here. We're really excited to dive into this one. As resident Red Bull fan, it's basically like, the second Red Bull team. So excited to dive into that. Also here with Connor. Connor, how you doing?
I'm good. I also find it a little disrespectful. What if this is the second? What if Red Bull's the second Nashville team? Do you
It's
ever think about
like Red Bull is the ghost of Christmas future for Nashville, and Nashville's the ghost of Christmas past for Red Bull. So it works out.
That might be the best way I've ever heard anybody describe that because it's so perfect. That's exactly how that runs. Uh, so we are here again to chat Nashville SC, talk about the 2024 season, a little bit back in the 23, where we came from, where we're going. But before we do any of that, as we've done in the 200 episodes plus before this, we got to hit Scarf for the week. Tim, I want to let you start it off first.
Yeah, absolutely. So as I was telling you guys before we started recording, I don't have a Nashville SC scarf that I can easily find. They're in some drawer that I don't remember which one. So I have the greatest scarf that's ever existed, the MLS season pass. That's right, the scarf of the TV deal of the league pass. And that's I think that says it all right there. That's very self-explanatory.
I gotta ask where you got
such a
it.
product even exists.
I gotta ask where you got it.
So the league sent it out to, I guess, a select group of journalists before last season, and somehow I made the cut. So, yeah, they sent out actually a jersey as well that has MLS season pass printed on it. So, I don't know where they went to go get this merch made because I think the producer would have been like, "Are you joking that you want us to put this on all these items?" But hey, I guess I benefited from it.
Well, if there was any incentive to drive this podcast even farther, it's for the MLS season pass scarf. That is the goal now. That's the pinnacle of this podcast. Connor, what are you rocking today?
We're talking Nashville. This is what 6 for 6 now that I've got a scarf for a team. That's
Yeah,
an
you're
incredible run. Let me show the other side first. This side has no wording on it. But yes, this is the Nashville scarf that I've got. It's a pretty good scarf, I would say. It's probably not my best scarf, but I like the design. The colors are really nice. So
yeah. Well, if we're showing off scarves and we're talking about the best one, I think this one's up there as one of the best ones I've got. It's upside down. Absolutely love the design on this one. It is just there's so much going on. The longer you look at it, the more you see. It is just beautiful. I mean, I there are so many on the wall behind me that are just name and then maybe some stripes or nothing at all. And I think actually around the corner on this side is a Seattle one that's literally black with the Seattle badge on it, and that's it. So this I really appreciate the detail and everything that's going on about it. So I think it's one of my better ones for sure. All right. Well, why don't we then jump into 2024 Nashville, where we are going. We're starting with Gary Smith again, remaining in charge for the fifth season since Nashville joined the league. Last season, seventh in the East, away from the play-in games, 12th overall, 13 wins, 11 draws, 11 losses, 10 draws, excuse me, and a loss to Orlando in round one. I guess the question for me is, what are the vibes like in Nashville right now? How are we feeling going into the season?
Mhm. Yeah, I think a lot of people are maybe, on our podcast we kind of push back against it, but I think in the fan base people are a little negative on the team. They feel like, okay, if this is as far as we can go, if this is the most we're going to see, I don't know how I feel about this going forward. I would say, you kind of mentioned the fifth year of Gary Smith. It's actually his seventh with the club because he did 2 seasons in USL before they started as a Major League Soccer team too. And I it's fair that the fans say, what you're going to see. You're going to see a really defensive team that hopes to get enough scoring, whether that's through Hani Mukhtar or mystery second option. You know what you're going to see. So I think fans understandably aren't necessarily thrilled about that, but I think the alternative to the way that Nashville wants to build its club is not a guaranteed upgrade. It makes a lot of sense to stick with what has gotten them there to this point. And regardless of whether the fan base is a little more down on the team or not, I do think what you're seeing is a club that knows that it's always going to be in the playoffs as long as it doesn't mess stuff up. And is that good enough is probably the question, more than do we actually think we can accomplish that out of the fans.
Interesting. Yeah. From the outsiders looking in, I think the negativity, not so much negativity, but not a lot of flash, right? And there never really
Mhm.
has been. It's always been the Hani show and supporting cast from the outside looking
Yeah.
in. But you're right. That's what you get, right? That's the Gary Smith style, and it's worked, right? So if it ain't broke, don't fix it, as they say. So because of the way that they play, it's been a relatively quiet window. Again, with
Mhm.
the returning players coming in, it's it makes sense. In your opinion, what's the best addition they've made so far?
I was actually lukewarm when it was announced, but I'm really high on this Tyler Boyd signing. Obviously, a former U.S. international. He picked the U.S. As a dual nat who was also eligible for New Zealand and had played, I think, exclusively for New Zealand youth teams. He was okay in Turkey for a really long time, and it was like, when you watch a guy play as as a US fan, you like kind of have a different standard than as a guy who could potentially help an MLS team. And I think what you saw from Tyler Boyd last year for LA Galaxy was a guy who can really be a difference maker in this league. And that's something that, especially as an attacking player, Nashville hasn't really had a second option other than Hani. I've already said it. You've already said it. I think it's not a mystery to anybody that there hasn't been a consistent second option for this team pretty much ever. And yes, they're hoping that Sam Surridge, the DP striker who signed during the summer window last year, can be the guy to change that. But I also think when you add a guy like Tyler Boyd, who can also play as a striker and he can be a second striker, I think they're going to see a little bit more of two striker formations this year just because they have that talent available. But I think a guy like Boyd who can be a difference maker from the wing in a way that they haven't really had. They've had speed, they've had a little bit of technical ability. They haven't really had a complete player on the wing. And Boyd might not have the same like standout quality. He doesn't have Fafa Pico's speed. He doesn't have Jacob Schaffelberg's explosiveness, but he also doesn't have some of the weaknesses that those guys have had. And Schaffelberg's back, so he's going to be able to kind of play as a complement to Schaffelberg too. And without the weaknesses, I think you're really going to see, a sort of guy who can figure out what Hani is lacking in a given game and kind of step in and fill that role in a way that Schaffelberg says, okay, if Hani isn't lacking speed or explosiveness, there's not a whole lot I can provide that he's failing to provide in this game. You have a guy who's a little bit more versatile, who can step in and play different ways to help on the given day that one of the best players in the league isn't providing on that day. And I think it's rare that you see Hani Mukhtar play and say, he's not providing something other than more than one of him, because you need more than one attacking player who can really make a difference. But I think Boyd can step in and kind of fill a different void based on what the team is lacking on a given day.
Yeah, Connor, I'm going to throw it to you after this, but I'm just going to piggyback off it because that's exactly where I'm at too. I'm really liking the Tyler Boyd move. He was a very good attacker in a very bad LA side, right?
Mm-hmm.
So now you put him around one of the best attackers in the league over the last 3-4 years, as well as some of the other returning players that they've got in a system that they know how it's going to be. You know exactly where there's not a lot of variability in that. You know exactly what you're going to have to do. You're going to go in and you're going to be able to combine with Hani Mukhtar and maybe Sam Sturridge up there, or whoever ends up being there, like you mentioned. I'm expecting a really big year out of him. So right on par with you there, Tim. Connor, your thoughts?
Let me just complete the three-peat. I'm also right on board with Tyler Boyd. Anybody that's listening, if they were to just Google MLS standings, I think they could find out in just like a minute where the weakness was for Nashville last year, and it was scoring goals. And I mean, we've already discussed it multiple times. I will get my fair share of saying it as well. It was a complete one-man show, and that show was named Hani Mukhtar. He had 24 goal contributions. The next highest on the team was 6. I'm not sure if I'm counting second assist there, but um, it's a and the person that had 6 is not even on the team anymore. So Hani needs some help, and hopefully Surge pans out and is part of that solution. But I think they've continued in the right direction to fix this, and Tyler Boyd is part of that. He was one of the best attackers on a struggling Galaxy team last year with 7 goals, 4 assists. I was of that same mindset where I was a little, what's the right way to say it? I guess like my expectations for him were not super high when he was first joining the Galaxy. I know he was kind of big when he was with Besiktas, but that was like 4 years prior, and he just really wasn't getting many minutes. And in the one season he did get minutes, he had 2 goals, 2 assists. So my expectations were low, but he did really well with Galaxy. And I think he's got a good chance to come into Nashville and do it again. Nashville, had I think actually don't quote me on this, but it's felt like they haven't played too much with wingers. I know they have guys on their team that can, but I feel like I remember a lot of like striker one, Hani as the second striker, and then a lot of midfielders. Uh, However, I think they'll probably have a plan for Boyd, whether that's to play with wingers this year or if maybe they'll play him more centrally, somewhere behind Hani. Regardless, I think if Nashville can find the early days from Randall Leal, combine that with Tyler Boyd, Surge, and Hani Mukhtar, I think Nashville will finally be turning in that right direction in terms of their attack.
Yeah, I would say so. In the past, they've kind of played with wingers. This past season, they went to kind of like a 4-diamond-2. And part of that was because of a guy that you mentioned, Randall Leal, is not like a speed up the flanks sort of winger. So he's a guy that they wanted to play as kind of like an advanced midfielder. And they said, okay, Hani Mukhtar can either be a second striker or he can be like a number 10. In the past, that's been as the number 10 in a 4-2-3-1. I think they said at the point of the diamond, and we can put another like really fast guy. It was often Fafa Pico or Jacob Schaffelberg up top with Surridge. You mentioned we didn't see a ton of goal scoring, and I think we can see that experiment either didn't have the right personnel or more cynically it just straight up failed. So I think when you do have a true winger that you're bringing in like Boyd, and like I said, he can play a variety of roles, but when you bring him in, you are bringing him in to go back to playing with true wingers. You don't want to play with wing backs as they have done in the past. They've played Alex Muil, obviously as Red Bull, a Red Bull aficionado. You know that Muil is not a guy who plays wing back by trade, but he can fit in there because he's a defense first winger, and that's basically what a wing back sounds like, I guess. But I think they would really like to play as a team that has an even back line and does have some speed on the flanks up top, and Boyd gives you that opportunity to do that, and then you see how the pieces fit together. And I think there's a little bit less of maybe a formation obsession and more of like how do these roles fit into our plan to score goals going forward, because it didn't work last year.
Funnily enough, we did Red Bull just before we got on this one to talk to you. And
they said we miss Alex Muil so much.
The Alex Muil right back conversation almost took off in that conversation too. And as I said in that one, and I'll say in this one, to save Connor a way longer than needed to episode, and you as well, I will not go down my what would have been if Alex Muil started as a right wing back, because I've got a whole theory. But what I do want to know is, what would you say is their biggest loss, the player that they're going to miss the most? Not a ton of people in this list that I'm looking at here that you're going to feel too badly, but there are a few. So just out of curiosity.
If we're just running through former Red Bulls, I think that there's only one answer here, really. I guess some people might say Fafa Pico because he added an element of speed that this team might not have anymore. But the answer is Dax McCarty, and I don't think it's very close either. He's in addition to being like the emotional leader of the team, and again, I think everywhere he's been, he has been that sort of guy. He's been that sort of leader on the field and press conferences, but he was also the guy who could turn midfield possession into attack in a way that, by the fact that he wasn't fully healthy last year, he wasn't fit all the time last year. I think that was a big part of what what they couldn't do in terms of creating goal scoring opportunities. They would get the ball in the midfield and say, okay, we'll try and get it in transition to Hani. And if that doesn't work, we don't have another option. Whereas if Dax is fully healthy, if Dax is fully fit, if Dax is sharp, which to be fair, even when he was fully fit last year, he wasn't always sharp. You have other ways to progress the ball forward on the dribble, and then he knows how to pick out that pass. That's a guy that yeah, we always joke on our podcast. He's not quite as old as us, so we can make fun of him for being old, but he didn't have the same sort of sharpness consistently. And it wasn't that he lost athleticism; it was that kind of the feet weren't always doing what the brain was telling it to do. And I don't know how old you guys are, but when you get to be 37, 38 years old, you'll understand exactly what Dax went through last year. But it is a situation where Nashville still doesn't have that. They didn't replace it in letting him leave in free agency. And obviously he signed with Atlanta, but they don't have a guy who can truly be a two-way midfielder. They have guys who can attack pretty well. They have a ton of guys who can defend very well, but they don't have somebody like Dax who can do both. And that's something that I think they're really going to have to either find their way through or find their way around, perhaps, or figure out a different way to kind of structure the team, because they have needed that in the past. And without Dax, I don't think there's a way that they can kind of build their attack the same way they've wanted to.
Sorry, Connor, I'm jumping in here again. I know I like to usually throw it to you after this, but I'm on the same page with you. And I want to talk Dax a little bit, because one of my favorite things about him, outside of his locker room, the way he can control a locker room and really drive that mentality and team first idea, was his ability to do everything. Be a destroyer, carry the ball into the midfield, link the play. And even if you asked him to be advanced, he could still do that. I know I listen to his podcast all the time while I'm driving into work or whatever. And he always joked about how he's really a number 10. But I mean, he had the skills to do all of that. And the reason why I don't think Fafa Picault is your biggest loss here is because you did get Tyler Boyd in here. Drew Yearwood is just not Dax. Drew tries to be Dax. And I think that's what Red Bull did when they saw him and brought him in as Dax was on the way out, or, with the little gap in there, was Yearwood tries so hard to pick up the ball, take a couple touches, and then link the play. His problem is he doesn't see the game as well. And I think that's one thing. I don't know if you've been able to see any preseason games with him or anything yet, but he has, for Red Bull, his biggest struggle was if they played him as a true 8, once he crossed into the attacking third, it was a giveaway every time. And I think that would be the biggest struggle you'll have for him. If Gary Smith can be like, hey, you're going to pick up the ball, you're going to take 4 touches, and you are going to find wherever Hani Mukhtar is and just give it to him. That's it.
Yeah.
No thinking, no decision making. He will be successful for you. Once you ask him to be a little bit more creative, I think you'll struggle.
Yeah, I think that's kind of the philosophy that they had bringing him in. I don't know how well they will do in executing it, but that's certainly the philosophy is. They saw that he signed as a young DP when he joined Red Bulls and said, okay, we can essentially get a guy on the cheap who has this potential but hasn't reached it yet. And what we can do is give him much simpler assignments, because we have Hani Mukhtar and we have some speedy and talented attackers on the wings. We'll see how it works. I think he's more of a poor man's Anibal Godoy, which Anibal Godoy is also very good, and he's also been very important to this Nashville team. But I think he's more like Anibal Godoy than he is like Dax, whereas Dax kind of feels like there's arms and limbs going everywhere as he's playing, but he always feels in control. Whereas Godoy looks like he's very calm on the ball, but doesn't actually feel like he's in control a whole lot. I feel like that's a little bit more of what you see out of Yearwood. And I did not watch every Red Bull game this past year, but I watch a hell of a lot of Major League Soccer. So I saw a lot of him play, but I do get that vibe where it's like, looks smooth, but you still feel like, the other shoe is always waiting to drop a little bit. And that's kind of how it feels with Godoy more than it ever felt with Dax.
I think that's a perfect description of what you're about to see. So we'll see how they play together. Connor, your thoughts in this space here?
So yeah, I was close between Dax and Fafa. I ultimately went Fafa Pico. I definitely understand that Dax's leadership is not something that's going to be replaceable in that team. No matter where he is in the league, you're not going to be able to replace the leadership ability that he's going to be able to bring to a team. But I look at the team and I see guys that I think are capable of being leaders in the team. And I don't know Nashville as much as, the normal Nashville fan will know. So maybe I'm wrong in thinking these guys, but I look at a guy like Sean Davis, Walker Zimmerman, Joe Willis, guys who have been with Nashville for multiple years now, in the league for so many years at this point. They're super experienced. I imagine these guys are capable of being good leaders as well on this team. Not in the same way that Dax is, but someone who could step up and at least fill the void, at least to some extent. So I think in terms of production on the field, I don't think Drew Yearwood is going to immediately be able to replace Dax and fill his shoes, but I we were talking about it on the Red Bull one. I think we have pretty good expectations for Drew Yearwood this year with Nashville. I mean, the pipeline for that defensive mid from Red Bull to Nashville has been super successful so far. It's just been like straight home runs and no swings and misses. So I feel like we're thinking that it's going to be the same thing with Yearwood again. I don't, like I said, I don't think he's going to hit Dax level as soon as he's there, but I think he's going to quickly work towards that way. So I went with Fafa Picault. I just went with it considering all the attacking troubles. I get that, they lost Fafa, they brought in Tyler Boyd, and I have good expectations for Tyler Boyd, and I think he'll do more than what Fafa was able to do last season. But I guess, the way teams stack talent nowadays in the league, I think it would almost be nice if you can have both. And maybe maybe that just wasn't realistic with how much money that they wanted. But if you can have Fafa Pico and Tyler Boyd and, Schaffelberg and Hani and Surge and all these other guys that can help in the attack, I think the more options you have, the better to help an area that was a major concern for them last year.
Yeah, I think it's a fair shot for both of them. And it's really, again, our usual criteria for this is, have they been replaced yet, and how well have they been replaced? So I mean, Yearwood's still the one up in the air, but you also are going to feel the Fafa loss. But the one that I want to know is less about the people that we already know about, but who is going to be the player that we want to watch this year that might maybe break into the first team, or break out as, maybe a consistent starter, or somebody that we need to look at like, oh, we weren't expecting him to be that guy.
Yeah, it's tough to say because I think the most obvious answer is a guy who unfortunately had to play a lot last year because Walker Zimmerman was hurt, and that's Lucas McNaughton, who joined early in the year from Toronto FC and emerged as not only a Ryan Gosling Ken lookalike from the Barbie movie, but also a very good and beyond just serviceable MLS center back. I think there's still a lot that he's not quite 100%. Every team would take him as a starter. I think Toronto would take him as a starter right now, though, and it took him all of like 4 games for Nashville to get to that point. It is a situation where if it's not Red Bulls that Nashville's like, hey, we'll take your cast off pieces and turn them into really good players, it's definitely Toronto. We've seen that with not just McNaughton, but Jacob Schaffelberg started that pipeline, so to speak, a little bit as well. But I think McNaughton is a guy who has come in and he wasn't expected to play a ton, but because Walker Zimmerman was so banged up over the course of last season, he ended up being essentially a third starter. He just displaced Jack Mayer, who was the draft pick from their very first super draft before they ever played a game, that they're so excited about, and they're still really excited about him. But McNaughton just earned the spot when Zimmerman came back. They were rotating at that second center back spot. He's not a guy who's going to go out and score goals, which is, I think, something that obviously Zimmerman does on set pieces. Mayer does it quite a bit on set pieces too. McNaughton is also not going to be the sort of like, plus athlete that Zimmerman has been in this league that I think Mayer has the potential to be. He's just going to go out there and do a job. As a defender, I think that's something that you really want out of a guy. You'd much rather have a guy who's going to do a job than a guy who's going to make a ton of mistakes, but occasionally gets a goal back for you. He's definitely one that I think if people have not watched this Nashville team play a whole lot, he's going to really surprise people. The fact that he's the only one that really springs to mind does kind of speak to what we were talking about before, and that there's a ton of continuity in this team. There's not a ton of guys that people haven't heard of that are going to make an impact, unless Jacob Schaffelberg is another guy that people haven't heard of. I think they should have by this point, because he's been such a contributor for Nashville in a season and a half, and he's going to continue to be. But the only other option is his former Toronto FC academy teammate, who is going to step in, and he's not just going to play kind of mop up minutes as you might expect. He's going to be a guy who maybe gets like a third of the total minutes at center back, and you see, you know, Walker Zimmerman get maybe just over 50%, and then you have that extra sixth for people to rotate that other spot. I don't think anybody expected that out of McNaughton when they signed him.
Yeah, I think those are two really good points, and it was definitely tough to pick from this one because, as you mentioned, lots of continuity. So, Connor, your thoughts here?
Yeah, I'm echoing that sentiment. Nashville's the, I think, joint second oldest team in the league, and I know when we look at this section for a lot of the teams, we typically aim towards the younger side, you know, the guys that haven't had too much experience yet, and maybe there's an opportunity for them this year. So it was a little tough to find someone for Nashville for that, but I did try to stick to that criteria. So I know we've probably exhausted talking about him already, but I went with Drew Yearwood at this spot, and I think the trade itself is a good indicator of where his stock is right now, because he got traded for 75K and then I think it was conditional additional 75K. So potentially up to 150,000, which in this market really isn't a lot. I mean, that's like, I mean, Nashville fans probably know this very well, but that's like less than half the cost or around half the cost of an international spot.
Yeah. It's about, so like 225 they've sold many for over the year. He would basically have to hit every incentive and still not quite hit that, and most likely.
It's funny.
Yeah,
we
exactly.
usually joke that Nashville sets the market,
Yeah.
right?
Yeah.
Like, believe you me, I know how much an international slot goes for.
Yeah.
Every offseason, I'm like, okay,
Yeah.
I got like a little stock ticker on the side of it.
You come in, the first thing is, all right, what's Nashville setting the price at? Who's following them?
So yeah, I think Yearwood's stock is low, and I think my view on him is a little skewed because I have a Red Bull co-host, so we've talked about him probably more than the normal person has. But I'm thinking that the everyday MLS fan probably does not know who Drew Yearwood is. And I think he's got a really good shot here in Nashville to just continue that Red Bull pipeline, slide right into that team. I don't know if he'll be a starter out now. I know there's obviously Sean Davis and Annabelle Godoy is there as well. So may not be an out and out starter, but I think he's got a good shot. It's a fresh start for him, which I think is the most important thing. And I mean, we were just talking, like, as Andrew mentioned, we were just talking about Red Bull. And I mean, I think there's still, you know, there were flashes where Red Bull fans saw potential in Yearwood. So I think a fresh start is good for him. I think he has an opportunity here to be a consistent starter and be in a team that is just really good defensively, which I think will benefit him.
Yeah, I mean, as it relates to Yearwood, I think he's like the obvious, you know, kind of taking a swing for somebody who's going to have a big year, because he's either going to have a huge year or it's going to be like a zero impact on the team. There's not going to be, he's a slight upgrade somewhere. You know, it's going to be he's either awesome or you just hardly even notice him. And obviously, Nashville bought at the price that they did because they thought, this is a guy who used to be a young DP, and we can get a ton of value for this very, very low price, and we're going to get a ton out of him. And if they're right, then I think you may have the better answer than I do, because I think, you know, Lucas McNaughton is going to be a guy who's going to go in and play a role. He's not going to be a guy that ever is going to kind of light the world on fire, whereas Yearwood could be that sort of guy that does go on and play a huge role.
And it wouldn't be out of the norm, right? Red Bull doesn't value somebody, they move him on, and Brian White 2.0, right? For me, mine's a bit more of a basic one that I think everybody's kind of just keeping an eye on, and it's Sam Surridge. You know, only 9 games last year. He did get 2 goals, but once again, as we've mentioned, it was the Hani show, right? 15 goals, and the next closest was 5, and that guy's gone. So, you know, that how Sam Surridge handles taking some of that load off, and how Gary Smith might, you know, work that. Again, we talked about maybe formations or systems or things like that. How he can find a way to get more than just Hani involved in the goals is going to be something to watch for me. So that's kind of where I'm going with that.
Yeah, and I think assuming you guys listen to ETR, they talk about the David Goss theorem, and Surridge came in and was real hot in the Leagues Cup last year, and then just died off completely when it got back to regular season. I think there's every reason to believe he flubbed a couple pretty big chances, like a couple of 0.6 xG chances, that if he hits those, the narrative is completely different. He was benched after one of them, and then Teal Bunbury completely missed an open header in the first playoff game against Orlando, either the first one or the home one. He missed a bad chance, and if Surridge had been in there, I think a lot of people would have expected him to hit that. I think the only reason I didn't say Surridge is because he was such a high profile signing that I don't think anybody would be surprised if it really came good.
Sure. This is why I love doing interviews, because in the last 2 days, I've heard about the David Goss theorem more than I have in the last 4 years. I sit here and I told Connor about it like when we first started this now 5 seasons ago. And it was like, okay, that's a thing. And now everybody that we talk to is like, bro, David Goss theorem, this dude's about to break out this year. This is why we do what we do. But now I've got I need one question from you. And that is, what are you asking of this team? Like, as you watch the season, what is the question that'll be on your mind throughout, as watching games or things like that?
Yeah, I think the biggest thing is, do you have enough gas in the tank? Because even losing a guy like Dax, even losing a guy like Fafa, who I think is 34 now, this is still not a young team. Do you have enough gas in the tank to play 34 regular season games plus CCL? We will not be calling it CONCACAF Champions Cup on our podcast. I don't know what you guys do, but we call it CCL still. You have Leagues Cup. There's a lot of competitions for this team to put out a best choice roster. And the question is, will they put out, essentially academy players and second team players? I'll spoil that. They're not going to. So do their experienced guys have the legs to play that many competitions and still be competitive at the end of the year? Because I think fatigue was the biggest reason for this team's second half collapse. And I don't think if you see that sort of situation again, that you can really continue to kind of say, okay, we are doing the same thing over and over each of our 5 years. It's been successful enough. If the same thing that happened last year happens this year, you start to question and say, okay, is there time for trying something different? Is there time for signing a bunch of younger guys rather than what we have? Because right now we have this reputation, a deserved reputation, for finding guys from within the league who have a lot of league experience, but those tend to be guys who are like 30 plus years old. And at that point, you don't know that you're going to get 34 games plus other competitions out of them. And that's something that I don't think Nashville will feel like they can afford to mess up again this year.
Yeah, I'm gonna jump in there because mine is along a similar line. So
Nice.
My question for heading into this season, and I'll give some context first before I read my question, but Hani played almost 3,700 minutes across all competitions last season, and that is insane. That is so many minutes on the legs, and it's no wonder that exactly what you're talking about, the fatigue hits at the end of the season, and it makes it so much harder to make a run in the playoffs. So my question was, can Hani survive playing another 3,000 minutes again this season? I think they've got guys that can help take the load off a little bit. I think Tyler Boyd helps. There's guys like Teal Bunbury who could help as well, but I still feel like with the way the roster is at the moment that there's a decent chance Hani could play 3,000 minutes again this season.
Totally fair. Totally fair. Mine again kind of builds off of my player to watch thing. Is I was kind of alluding to it before, right? Will Surridge be able to carry some outload? How will that happen? Things like that. Just as I watch these games, it'll be one of the things on my mind is how are they going to figure this out? Because eventually, I mean, we say this every year, but eventually somebody's going to figure out how to stop him. And from that point, what do you do, right? So, and again, we may be wrong because we've said that for the last 3 years now, but that's my big one there, and the time will tell, right? Time will tell how that is approached. So my last big question for this interview, at the end of the day, all the games are done. Where is Nashville finishing in the table?
Yeah, I think I have them probably 4th or 5th in the East, and if you had asked me last year, I would have said 2nd or 3rd. So it's not like I'm I'm Nostradamus about this, but I think you take the same team as last year and you make it a little bit younger. And I think the fact that Boyd can be considered not only a little bit younger than some of the wing options that they had last year, but also an upgrade, I think, in terms of overall skill set on a guy like Tyler Boyd. And then you look at, again, the Goss theorem and Sam Surridge not flubbing a couple chances. And I don't, part of it is that he just played so few minutes that if he flubs a couple chances, he doesn't have the opportunity to make up for it later. But I think there's going to be quite a bit more attack out of this team. I don't know how they're going to be able to defend quite as consistently without Dax. I do think they're going, like, last year was a season where everything basically went wrong and they still finished 7th in the East. I think if they just had average luck, and this is something that we've talked about on our podcast as well, is like, if they just had average luck, they probably would have been 4th or 5th last year. And I think with the amount of change that they've had, even if some of those changes are positive, there's going to be growing pains, and having essentially the same season as last year, but without the bad luck is about where I have them. And that means 4th or 5th in the East.
Interesting. Connor.
So I've probably said this a number of times across the teams that we've covered so far, but I think the East is a bloodbath this year. I think it is stacked. There are so many good teams in the East this year versus like the West, where I think it's a lot better. Like if Nashville was back in the West again, I think they're top 4. But in the East, it's just like it's Cincy, Orlando, Columbus, Philly, Atlanta. Like it just feels stacked in the East. So I still think Nashville's a playoff team. I just think with the attack, I'm still a little uncertain. This is like the exact same wording I used for Red Bull too. I feel like these teams are literally one and the same roster wise and results wise. I think they're maybe 6-7 in the standings, but I think they're definitely a playoff team. I think even if things go wrong and like Surge doesn't hit, we're looking at, dare I say, another Ake Loba, but I still think Nashville gets in with that amazing defense at least at 8-9 if things go wrong. But I think they're 6-7.
I noticed you were listing off juggernauts in the East and you didn't say Red Bull. Did you make a mistake there?
I did not.
Are you sure?
You were with me last episode. You know where I see them.
I'm gonna mark it down as a mistake so you can stay on the pod. But I'm kind of right in the same. I'm kind of a combo of there. I can see it going either way. I don't see them as a top of the table East team right now. But I do think that a home playoff, if everything clicks, like you mentioned, everything went wrong last year and they still finished 7th. I think if everything clicks as they expect it to, I think 3 or 4 is realistic. That being said, if things take a little bit longer to click and maybe Boyd doesn't get into the rhythm right away, any one combination of those things, I can see away playoffs as an option as well. So right now I've got them between 4 and 7, or maybe 4 and 8, like Connor said, if the lowest of the low. But I definitely still see this as a playoff team. Their consistency, everybody knows how the system's going to play. That sort of stability is helpful in a playoff type league like this. So, all right. Well, I think that's everything that we've got to cover. So first off, Tim, I want to say thank you so much for stopping by and having a chat with us tonight. We learned I won't speak for Connor, but I learned a heck of a lot more about the
Connor learned a
Nashville
lot too.
insight.
Yeah,
he'll sandbag, but he learned a lot too.
That's right. So we love doing this. We like to see other points of views. We sit here and we talk about what we think, but Connor's not always right, so he needs to be corrected every once in a while. But yeah, really, really appreciate you. Want to give you some time to tell people where to find you. Where can they go find your content?
Yeah, absolutely. If you search Club and Country Podcast on your podcast source of record, that's the best place to find it. You can also go to clubcountryusa.com. I haven't done nearly as much written content in the last probably year plus as I've wanted to, but I still post all the podcasts, and that's a great place to find it. So if you go to either of those, I got to give a shout out to my co-host Wes Bowling. You can find him on Twitter at West Bowling TN. So both of us have been covering this club for longer than anybody. So we're really excited to get into year 5 of the MLS era.
Wonderful. Well, thank you so much again for joining us. We hope everybody enjoyed. Make sure you go over there and give them some love, give them some follows, and for some really, really great Nashville SC content. Make sure you stick around for the rest of our Not So Deep Dive series. We've got 23 more, so be around for them. Thanks so much again for listening, everybody. We'll see you next time on the next episode of the Designated Players and MLS podcast. See ya.